In this video, I'm going to teach you how to do 3 types of bias binding that can be used for the inside of this bag. You can also use the method of turning through the pocket and then there's no bias binding. But if you're using some thicker fabrics like vinyl, you will probably not be able to turn the whole bag through the pocket without a lot of frustration at least. So for that, I would recommend using the bias binding. So the first method, I will be teaching you how to use it with store-bought bias tape. For the second method, you'll be making your own bias tape using 3-inch bias strips. And for the third, you'll be using 2-inch bias strips of vinyl. So first, open your double fold bias tape. It should be 1/2 inch wide when it's all folded up. So you unfold it, and these insides are already 3/8 inch wide. And our seam allowance for this is 3/8 of an inch. So that's good because we can just follow along the fold. Now in the pattern, you will first be basting on it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and then sewing the gusset to the body of the bag with a 3/8 seam allowance. And at that point, you'll be sewing on the fold. But just to simplify, to show you the basics of how to use binding, we're going to skip the basting step for this. So I'm going to start sewing on the fold, which is 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and follow the curve with both the bias tape and follow the curve with the bias tape there. And I'm going to turn this over so you can see how when you fold this over, it just so nicely covers this whole seam. But with a bag, there's a variety of thicknesses. It might fit just fine over one place and be too thick over another. And if that happens, if you find that it just isn't reaching over, then just take your scissors and trim off that part until you can put the bias tape over and it covers that seam perfectly. So I'm going to use clips to hold this in place. And I should have used a different fabric on the back. This is the back. So I'm going to go back to the front, and we are going to lengthen our stitch and stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from this edge all the way around. And occasionally double check, make sure you're catching the back. There we go, nicely bound, in the back as well. Okay, second, this is my preferred method. You'll be sewing 3-inch wide strips and then folding them in half. And we will sew with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance yet again. This bag has some tight curves, so just try to flatten out the bias tape as well as you can, keeping it matching up with the raw edge of all the layers. And I'm going to stop there so that I don't run out of space for my third option. Okay, just like the other method, make sure that your bias tape can cover the whole seam, and trim off any places where you're concerned that it won't reach. So I'm just going to trim this corner just a little bit. And use your clips to clip it in place. Looks like I got a little bit of a wrinkly seam right here. Let me try to open it, straighten that, and put it back. That looks better. And once again, I will go about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And occasionally check and make sure you're catching the back in your seam. And the final method, I'm going to switch to my vinyl foot. I'd say this is for those who are ambitious and experienced. We'll see how well I do. Same thing, 3/8 of an inch. All right. For this, you're going to want to increase your seam allowance, increase your stitch length. I don't love binding, but I see some people who do beautiful things with it. Okay. And oops. This looks very nice and polished, but vinyl can be tricky to work with, especially right now. I just have a little circle, but when I'm working on a bag, this is a lot more unwieldy. So choose wisely what you think you and your machine can handle in terms of patience and layers. Oh, and I ran out of thread. So that turned out pretty well. So here are your options. Bias tape, or you can make your own bias tape, but the nice thing about the store-bought is that it comes with that inside edge being 3/8 of an inch in width already, which helps for this. Or I think of this as the quilt binding method, because this is how I bind a quilt, except for with a quilt you generally hand stitch the back. And vinyl. There you go.